It's recording. So good evening to all of you. I must apologize for this delayed late due to a technical problem I just faced. I don't know why suddenly the link didn't work and I had to create another link. So today the speaker Dr. Kumar Das, uh, he will be speaking on doing research in public policy. And another person who is from the Rajiv Gandhi University, Arunachal Pradesh, Dr. Shamanta Shahu, and he will be the discutant of today's talk. Professionally, we all are part of the academics. We all are assistant professor or associate professor, professionally speaking, but personally we are also related. Dr. Samanta Shahu, he is my super senior in Hyderabad University, and Hemanta, he is my junior. And when I'm, you know, saying junior, it's a very, you know, I will not say it's a respectable word, but it is a word, that is related with love and affection, and we understand it being the part of HU and JNU. So, as the convener, let me do my job. Let me introduce the speaker. Let me introduce the topic, and then Dr. Das, he will start his deliberation. So, as I mentioned, that Dr. Das is currently serving as an assistant professor, Department of Public Administration, Utkal University. Earlier, he had worked with Higher Education Department, Government of Odisha, at Model Degree College, Deoghar. That was very much, that is near to Sambalpur University. And he has completed his PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, with 2 years European Commission Fellowship at Stockholm University, Sweden. He has worked with UNDP India for a period of 2.5 years. He has published 28 articles in different journals like Elsevier Energy Journal, Renewable Energy of Routledge, American Journal of Renewable Energy System, Indian Journal of Public Administration, Economic and Political Weekly, and many more. And there are many things this speaker has achieved. I just mentioned a few because we both believe that our goal has not been fulfilled. So we have to go miles. Hence, we have to forget what we have done in past. We have to concentrate what we should do in the future. The topic on which Dr. Das will deliberate, that is doing research in public policies. Friends, public policy are very important to the life of individuals, or you can call life of citizens. In fact, it is the individual life is, or the citizen life is formed by this public policy. No doubt, dream for improved life rests on our own efforts. Public policy aid to our efforts to achieve our dream. Like any other social concept, public policy cannot be static. It has to satisfy the ever-changing needs of citizens in different contexts. Hence, researching public policy is very much required. In the early 1950s, public policy had developed as an academic search, and since then it has been attaining the position of a discipline in the area of social science. Along with it, public policies forms a significant component in many courses and academic programs in various disciplines like political science, public administration, economics, business management, etc. Public policy not only engages with the knowledge seekers but also practitioners and grassroots performers as well. So the knowledge of public policy is that much, you know, relevant for all of us. Researching public policy requires an understanding of people, resources, and global benchmarks. It has to bridge the loop points between policy ideating, shaping, implementing, mapping, accessing, and researching. Assessing and researching. Researching public policy should also address the disciplinary examination and practices. Today, the speaker certainly addresses these issues. Along with it, he will deal with the that emerging factors affecting the public policies. And what are those emerging factors and how to uh, breeze the loop points. Today the speaker will deliberate and he will make sense to all of us. So with this few lines of introduction, I welcome Dr. Das to start his deliberation.
Okay. Uh, Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Himanshu, sir. Apart from the relativistic aspect or the common aspects we possess on the academic front, knowledge domain is so vast that talking about policy and specifically on public policy is such a challenging task for any researcher of any platform at any point of time across the globe. So now I would like to request the technical support so that they can focus on my screen and then uh, they will allow me to present my PowerPoint presentation.
No,
So that
I am the technical person, but I am handling it. But what I should do, I exactly don't know. I think previously Dr. Panda presented
Mhm.
with his PPT, and I didn't do anything.
Okay,
He managed.
okay, fine. So I'll be sharing my entire screen. Okay.
Our friend speaker will join us soon. Any problem? No, I can't hear you. It's, you have to unmute, I think, if you want to speak.
I'm trying to share my whole screen, which needs my browser. So yeah, okay, I'm doing that.
Okay.
So my entire screen would be shared for the system, and then yeah.
Yeah.
Is my whole screen visible?
Yeah, it's visible. It's visible.
Okay. So I think I'm not able to see myself in a way. So I'll ask the organizer to uh, confirm me that whether the first screen is visible fully or not.
Yeah, it's visible. First screen.
Okay, fine. So thank you so much and good evening, everyone again. And technical glitches have now become a part and parcel of our life because just after the COVID scenario, now we are moving across the Omicron crisis, and then it compelled us to rely more on technology. So in that sense, this is also a part of public policy, I assume, because when policy challenges come, we don't have to address something individually, but the whole system has to respond. And as every system is a composition of every individual, so in that sense, while talking about doing research on public policy, or in that sense, if I'll be focusing on some appraisals or kind of definite aspects of public policy, uh, whether governments choose to do or not to do, it's generally something called as public policy. I'll be not going through the definitions because these are very common things in a way. Every researcher has to go for the definition of the scope or the objective beforehand if you're going something for a discussion in a specialized way. So in that way, uh, please have a look at the diagram I have on the screen. This is a kind of symbiotic movement forward. For example, one of the finest policy thinkers or one of the finest policy analysts, Thomas Dye, uh, he has quite stated public policy in a very different way. Uh, According to him, how public policy differs or how public policy emerges in recent time as a specific notion, in a way, deciding something
Sir,
which
your
is
voice is not audible.
what my voice is not audible.
I think I can hear your voice. I don't know
Yeah.
why your voice is. I think
Uh,
you can continue. Since it is recorded, I think you can also,
Yeah,
hear from the
for
recorded
some
voice.
people, there must be some technical resonance, but according to me, my internet connection is really fast, and I think the recording would have no glitches. I think.
Yeah, you continue.
Right. Right. Okay. So, according to Mr. Dye, and then some thinkers like Chandler and Planos, uh, they talk about the strategic use of resources. So, what this diagram talks about is it's a strategic motion of public policy forward, which is quite symbiotic in nature. So, while researching on or doing research on public policy, the individual researcher or the policy man who's a part of the policy making process has to move symbiotically first. Second, in the current times, uh, the study of public policy has emerged as a fresh branch of social sciences,
Hello.
and it has evolved as a
Sir, your
interdisciplinary
voice is
link.
very slowly. Please loudly.
I'm very loud, I think.
Yes,
Am
sir.
I audible, Hemanta, sir?
You are very
Your
much
voice is
audible
not
to me.
too
I don't
clear,
know.
sir. Sound.
Yeah.
Please
So
come
this is the
loudly.
technical problem on the part of the individual who is saying that my voice.
You are
I'll
audible, sir. You are audible. Please continue, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
my
yes.
internet is really fast, so I don't think there should be a chance of any glitch. Okay, so in that respect, when I'm talking about uh, in current time, okay, when the disciplines are actually clashing their boundaries, and then in the academic sense, we are calling it interdisciplinarity, and in some other senses, when we are trying to amalgamate between sciences and social sciences. Okay, according to Harold Laswell, for some time, he has defined a term called policy sciences. Okay. So researchers can more focus on these aspects, like, for example, in some prominent universities, we have the disciplinary branch called the policy studies branch as a part of sciences, or something called science policy, which was previously was there in my university. So policy as a discourse of both science and social sciences has emerged really in a very particular way in recent time. This is a kind of conceptual change. So this diagram refers to something called the collateral and symbiotic movement of public policy ahead, while venturing into both the disciplines of science and social sciences. Okay, so this is something a relativistic approach that I have framed in both these images, like. Okay, so people are texting me that I'm not audible. Really?
I
Can
think,
you?
Dr. Das, you are very much audible. I
I
think there is problem from their side, and
right.
many people are also saying that you are audible. Now you can continue without any interruption.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, 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 yes.
Okay. So this is something. This is a diagrammatical representation of something which is both historical and present in nature. Okay. So what the church used to do in very ancient time is they used to compel people to make a shape and pray, and they used to break the continuum in a span of time, that they used to say people that make different shapes, so that the god or the creator or whoever it is, the almighty, will accept you in different forms, so that he can give you mercy in different forms, and he can accept you in different forms. Okay, what a unique kind of ideation on the part of the church. Now, going for the second image, we quite moved ahead of religion per se, in that sense, church and the hegemony of church or religion over the administrators or the rulers, and then we moved for something bright and the form we actually accepted across the globe, called democracy, right? So take democracy now a time, the policy integration in terms of e-governance, electronic governance, and some major modes transforming or compelling systems to be integrated with technology more. The pencil being a tool from a static notion of a carbon rod, and then becoming a digital pen, the movement in the direction of public policy per se, in that respect, is also related, that I have tried to research on while going through the historicity or the historical aspect of public policy and the movements now. So there are some system of laws while defining public policy, and then what are the regulatory measures now. Okay, so the system of laws moved across, or transcended across over a period of time, and the regulatory measures in that sense became particularly focused. And then when we're talking about allocation of resources specifically, because resources are limited and our wants are unlimited, or wants are actually expanding. Okay, so what should be the course of action? Should it be actually welfare, or a equitable distribution of resource, or whether we should go for actualizing the policies on the ground, or how the policy shape should be, or how the policy should look? Because in recent time, when we went through several elections in several states, and we are mostly concerned because Odisha also went for both urban local self-governance and rural local self-governance modes of manifestation through polls. Since last 3 months, we are going through the exercise, and I think the final stage came yesterday. So, what is the visibility of a public policy which actually matters? Okay, so it has two surfaces. The surface which looks from the outward way, which doesn't require any specialized knowledge or distinctions to understand, and then something which is hidden in a latent form that needs to be understood from the underpinnings of theory. So that is what the researchers should look at when we're talking about the topic specifically called doing research on public policy. So I have also a contestation while actually going through the topic, right? That is doing research on public policy or doing research in public policy. That is my contestation. So that is my self contestation. Maybe some people argue that both are correct with respect to the norms of English grammar. But what should be the priority then? We should be enveloped by the very much expanded norms of the public policy discourses which drives every democracy in the world, or there should be there we should be looking at the discriminatory norms. For example, in recent time, some of the countries are talking about the attacks of Russia over Ukraine, which is a policy misadventure, and some people are saying that in a different version who are in favor of the Russian dispensation, that it is all about national interest. So what is public policy is actually about? Is it about making some agendas, or is it about making some discourses which is both long term and short term? Can we equate both short, moderate, and long term measures, or how should we evaluate the options? Okay, so these all things form the defining aspects of public policy when researching on it, or while giving it a form which moves from, or which rises up from the theories to be practicable in nature, or while implementing it on the ground. These things come to the fore according to my understanding. So how some people quite uniquely defined the aspects of public policy, like David Easton. He in his seminal book The Political System, published in 1953, he talked about the authoritative allocation of values for the whole of society. So my contestation or my point here is the authoritative allocation, which no more exists. Okay, we don't say, or we cannot say any democracy or any self-elected government as authoritative in nature. This completely negates the definition and the purpose of democracy when we are implementing a policy for a state, right? So in that respect, for the whole of society is fine, but the authoritative allocation of values, it has changed the norm. So in recent time, maybe we can redefine that framework. And then according to the book Power and Society, published in 1970s, Harold Laswell and Abraham Kaplan defines public policy as a projected program of goals, values, and practices. So my point would be for you all is how to shape those goals, values, and practices and unify them for a public policy approach, because it has to involve both welfare, it has to involve both national interest, it has to involve everyone, every individual across the whole spectrum of any country, and specifically talking about India as an extremely pluralistic and critically diversified nation. The practices in terms of unifying everyone becomes a very dubious and challenging task for any government in power. Okay. So also this has something to do with the aspects or the writings of Carl Friedrich Inman and his government of 1963. So he mostly focuses on the policy concept attributes. So if the policy concept should have a goal, an objective, and a purpose, very simple, right? But these seemingly simple things, while manifested or while in motion on the ground, they just break down, or they don't actually make a shape which is visible. This has something to do with the introduction to the study of public policy, written by Charles Jones in 1977. So he has tried to break down the norms and the notions of public policy. He has clearly stated that breaking down the notion of public policy into various components and parts and measurable impacts. So according to my research or my public policy understanding, or as we are floating a new course in our university since last semester, to fulfill the norms of National Accreditation and Assessment Council (NAC) and NIRF ranking procedures, we are offering a paper on public policy. So we have tried to capture some norms of Charles Jones in when he's trying to break down the notion of public policy. So the components, parts, and measurable impacts draws in. This is a very defining moment for public policy to be moving far away from qualitative aspects to quantitative aspects, when that is the same time when the discipline called economics got transformed into econometrics. Okay, mathematical assistance, and then the mathematics completely overlapping the theoretical underpinnings of economics came at a time during 1960s and 70s, when the globe was moving through several crisis situations. So we tried to break down those norms so that development could be measured. Later on, they became the defining or the inspiring points to frame something called Millennium Development Goals, or UNDP defining or UNDP trying to make annual reports, the UNDP development reports, and then we moved in 2014 towards Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs). So this is the defining point when we moved ahead. Actually, we tried to quantify public policy discourse from a qualitative approach to a quantitative approach. So the intervention of economics or econometrics became very much paramount, or become very much necessary actually, because we cannot eliminate that factor out. If we cannot measure something called welfare or a policy manifestation for the people, then how can we assess its success, or for the political parties per se? On basis of what they will go for their political manifestos for the next term of elections, and the promises already made, if those development indicators could not be measured in real sense. So this is quite important in the motion of public policy coming into the framework of human life. Okay, so for a researcher, or while doing research on public policy, the nature and scope of policy or public policy needs to be understood in a pragmatic and clear way. So the same thing I was talking about previously, what the government chooses to do or not to do about a specific problem. So resolving a problem becomes necessary, and the authoritative allocation of values for a society also forms a part of it. So then we have to define, or we have to go through a process while we need to decide who gets what. We have to identify the beneficiaries, right? If you look at this is for an example for all the researchers or the students connected with us digitally from all across the parts of Orissa state, or maybe some of my students from outside, who gets what is all about giving allocation for any resource in a distributive approach. Maybe it is the PDS system, or when we initially thought about at the ascent point of this century, when we talk about identifying everyone in form of UIDAI, Unique Identification Authority of India, under the leadership of Nandan Nilekani, who gets what became prominent, because we need to identify the beneficiary first. Then we can reach them. Okay, when to reach them? When necessary, when any situation arises, where? Everywhere, actually everywhere, when we're talking about a democracy. And how? We need to redevelop the policy framework to define that, or to answer that how. Okay, so to establish the boundaries of our freedom, or as Amartya Sen says, freedom has no limits, or freedom is a defining point for any country or any state across the globe. Establishing a boundary is also a necessity. It's an absolute necessity while talking about public policies, because this is public policy. This is not private policy, or this is not an individual policy. This is for all. This is for everyone. This is not about equality at all. This is all about equity. Whatever someone needs, in what proportion, we have to provide that. This is all about public policy. So coloring the contours of our interactions with others in our new system. Okay, so I have framed this with respect to the latest observation we have according to the system. The system is no more only political or social or economical or technical system. It is the amalgamation of all the politico socio econotech system, we call it today, as we are moving away towards moving away from all the static modes of functioning in the systems approach, and then we are moving towards integrating everything tech in our day-to-day activities of an individual, or the biometric capturing, or devising new policies capturing every individual. It is tech adaptive and as well as tech driven system. So while going through everything, okay, actually every aspect of understanding of policy discourse, we have to always go back to the books, because without books or without reading substantially on the theoretical part, we cannot move ahead. So these are some seminal books from which I have understood public policy till now, and some of the prominent writers across the globe also define and redefine and learn and unlearn from these books. So, according to Deborah Stone in the book Policy Paradox, The Art of Political Decision Making, she talks about decision paradox, centrist and anomalistic approaches of public policy, where decision making becomes paramount on the part of a individual, whereas paradox is being created for the system. Although that individual is a part of the system, but decision of that individual becomes paradoxical for the system, which happens in every part of the world, which happens in every aspect of public policy. So we need to go towards a centrist approach. Why centrist? Because the ideas of the left or the right or the new greens will not work in a policy dimension. We have to be practical enough, so we have to go centrist. Okay, and what are the anomalies? Anomalies of action over the people, or while measuring satisfaction. We are talking about nowadays, we're mostly focused on defining happiness indicators, right? So while defining someone's happiness, can we measure that in absolute terms? Whatever indicators we impinge upon some individual, or how much privacy we can deep down to an individual, to their respective homes or their day-to-day interactions or conversations, or whatever means we adopt, those anomalies could never be eliminated. So this creates a policy paradox apart, a kind of policy opportunity as well, according to my understanding. So the principles of values and then the method of governance needs to be captured according to the book Policy Paradox. And then this is the Nobel Prize winning author's book, Muhammad Yunus, who revolutionized the microcredit sector of Bangladesh through the book. Through this book, he has tried to capture some of his experiences. A world of three zeros. Okay, what are the zeros? Poverty, hunger, and war and emissions. Okay, these are the zeros. So the new economics of zero poverty, zero unemployment, and zero carbon emissions. This is the policy intent on our part. This is the intent of policy, where the zeros needs to be captured. Okay, poverty should be measured, eliminated. Hunger should be measured and eliminated. Work is more important for India or Indian subcontinent mostly, while focusing on the public policy paradoxes, because whatever you account for in our GDP or whatever we calculate, we mostly calculate it from the organized sector, which constitutes only 3 to 4% of the whole economy, right? This is a very much contrasting, or in some sense, a ironical fact, because we cannot measure the whole dynamics of a nation while capitalizing only a 3 to 4% of the population who comes under the bracket of the organized sector. So then, mostly we are worried now about emissions, right? So we are talking about global warming. We are talking about limiting our temperature indicators. We are doing so much on United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change repetitively every year. The developed states are promising a lot. The developing countries are expecting a lot, and the underdeveloped countries are lying behind a lot. This is the paradox on the part of the zeros, which we are trying to capture. So in that sense, going for more books, uh, Thomas R. Dye's book, Understanding Public Policy, I have went through the whole book, and then last year, when I understood that policy is somewhat, because I have tried to capture these two books on the same frame, because the same thought-bearing book called The Submerged State, how Suzanne Mettler tries to define how invisible government policies undermine the US democracy. Okay, so she terms the state policy making as submerged policies, because submerged, because uh, the part which is visible, above the water is for the people. Okay, people are looking at the policy to the front, which is above the water surface, but the submerged part, which lies hidden or latent underneath the water surface, we cannot see it. Okay, so while understanding public policy or evaluating it in terms of the submerged policy framework, the government policies are mostly invisible. Okay, there is a good practice actually which I am appreciating about Indian government nowadays, because for every policy making, including the recently very much discussed in our academic circles, the NEP 2020, National Education Policy 2020, for every policy, they are floating it on the public domain for a period of time, 3 to 4 weeks. The public has to opine, and then this is actually being taken into account while defining the norms of the policy. Okay, so this is a very bright phase actually on the part of the dispensation on the policy front. I'm a critic also of the government, but I never look back, or I never judge things when things are quite bright in nature. So this is not submerged. Okay, so going for some theoretical underpinnings of the policy evaluation aspect, behavioralism matters a lot for any individual who is a policymaker, and then for the system, the organs of the system and the environment matters much. According to Stewart and Nagel, edited volume, Public Policy Evaluation, it talks about how theoretical aspects are impinging upon the system and its organs for a systemic environment, which needs to be pragmatic in nature and which needs to be optimistic also, according to the Nagel's edited volume. So this is Mr. Winston Churchill, okay, the famous man, and this is the latest book actually, The Administrative Burden of Policy Making by Other Means. Okay, so here what Miss Heard and Mr. Moynihan tries to do in the book Administrative Burden Policy Making has to find some alternatives. Okay, so we need three approaches for that: the retrospective aspect and the prospective approach, and then the integrated approach. And this should be in a chronology. Okay, according to Winston Churchill's inspiring life cycle, or We Shall Not Fail, the inspiring one. Okay, this has been written by his granddaughter, okay, Celia Sandys, and her friend Jonathan Littman. They try to capture how governments or systems respond to specific situations. Going for the historical analysis of several human race defining moments, public policies have actually mattered. Okay, now some people are criticizing United Nations, and then some people are looking at much back to the League of Nations, and how UN Security Council needs to expand and include more, or their referendums or their decisions are not working on a country which is trying to forcefully capture another land, which is independent and which is democratic in nature, which is governed by the democratic leader or democratically elected government or cabinet. So for that respect, retrospective, prospective, and integrated policy approaches should move in consonance, and then in a order of priority. Okay, in a chronology. So both descriptive decision theory and normative decision theory in that aspect. What actually there is, one has to go through every aspect of decision making, and then we have to create a norm, or we have to make a norm or norm building, so that future policy decisions or future policy courses could take examples or extract examples, so that new policy modules could be established. Okay, so this is all about the descriptive and the normative approaches of decision making theory. So this is my thought after going through all these books. A common thought that a public policy well formulated brings both social equity and saves resources, and this is mostly applicable for the developing states. Within quotes, developing states. Okay, social equity is mostly required for the developing states because their demands, or the demand curve, is much ahead than the so-called already developed ones. Okay, so social equity has to be established, and then saving resources, because we constitute the developing countries constitutes almost 80% of the global population. Okay, so including the underdeveloped ones. Okay, so in that sense, saving resources is the priority aspect of policy. And then while moving across a public policy discourse, there are some fundamental talks or fundamental frameworks. This is quite normal from a practitioner's point of view, but maybe useful for the students if they will be writing something on public policy papers. The most important aspect of this graph or this chart is two things: the technology debt and the policy debt, public debt. Okay, so this technology debt and public debt always move through constraints. Okay, and to remove, okay, or to sideline those constraints, policy should be unaligned and the infrastructure ineffectiveness should be eliminated out. Planning should be ineffective and move away from constraints so that technology or financing models could rope in, and then they can move up, or they can crop up some new strong policy dimensions. Okay, so this involves some examples. While William and Dunn talks about the integrated framework of policy. Okay, there are some common things which are very much necessary to make a policy centrist state. The market needs to be open, accessibility of everything, use and utility and values, innovation, job, society, and trust. Trust on the part of both. It's a both way process. Trust, the electors or the people have to trust on the government, and the government have to bear a trust on the people as well. So then only growth and well-being can happen. So I have tried to examine six different institutions, or six different policy platforms or plans. Okay, the first one is OECD. And I'm talking about or meeting for G5, G20 meetings, or the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. They are quite leveraging values for transforming the trade and economically integrative network of the globe. OECD forms a network amongst their state to economically integrate more. For example, this example maybe resembles much to the Indian scenario. SARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, has become quite defunct since last 5-7 years. Quite optimistically, we formed the South Asian University at New Delhi by everyone's funding, and then we made a SARC bank and everything, and we also tried to elevate our trade. And then there are also some proposals pending with some international negotiation tables with respect to WTO. That this story is all about the last decade. Okay, SARC was trying to cement its place in the South Asian region, but then what OECD countries did was they tried to capture every expanded market out of their ambit. Okay, the contrast in that part is OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which are much talked about now because people are on reeling under the pressure of hiked hydrocarbon prices. And last evening, there is a kind of uproar outside some petrol pumps. And then today I heard some hours before that the petrol pumps union are going for a strike for 2 days. So what Organization of Petroleum and Exporting Countries are doing is they are trying to stop the supply sometimes to regulate the prices. Okay, so the price regulatory mechanism, if we consider it as a policy approach, they are trying to balance things. They're trying to balance the crude oil price per barrel price, which is available on the benchmarks. And then what they're trying to regulate is they're trying to regulate some political equations as well. This is somewhat of the global level. Okay, but while coming to the national level, the Rajiv Gandhi Gramin Vidyutikaran Yojana and the Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gramin Vidyutikaran Yojana as a public policy approach or a welfare centric approach, they don't account much in terms of revenue, but they are trying to reach everyone. Okay, While coming to the front of Odisha, Biju Gram Jyoti Yojana, and now recently in news, or recently being very much advocated by the government, the Biju Swasthya Kalyan Yojana. And today I got the papers. Biju Swasthya Kalyan Yojana has complete documentation process, and how most of the hospitals of India, almost every hospital, nursing home is included as a part of it. So while going for a public policy discourse in a complete welfare centric approach, we have to go for two things: how much money we have and how to invest it. Two things. Any economist or any investor will say that. But how to effectively use it in the policy discourse, this creates some kind of illusion. Okay. Or if we consider that policy approach or policy decision making as a problem actually, and what are the preferred solutions to the problems. So we go through a illusion called the prospective retrospective illusion. And how to eliminate that out, or how to marginalize that gap, we need to do something. Sorry, it was a gulp of water break. So the efforts of the government to resolve the problem comes after the gap resolution. So by William and Dunn in public policy analysis approach, the prospective retrospective illusion comes through a gap where the preferred solutions to the problems has to move or inch towards the efforts of the government to resolve the problem. So what should be the efforts look like? Then comes the picture of different models of public policy, or how these different public policy models behave actually. Okay, so mostly we have the 7 prominent models. Some people say there are 4 models, some say 5 or 6. So from every source I have tried to include everything. So these are the 7 primary models based on which we go for public policies, or we define and redefine public policies, or we try to re-innovate. Okay, I'm not talking innovate, re-innovate. Okay, so group model, institutional model, process, elite, rational model, incremental, and systems model. Okay, so in that respect, I have tried to capture an image. This is mostly relates to us, so I have intentionally put it in here. So this is about academia. Okay, the teacher's commitment to the success of the students. Okay, so high and fair expectations matters much. The students' knowledge of progress also needs to be capitalized, and then the progressive hierarchy of skills needs to be tapped. How to do that? I don't know actually. So several thinkers. Okay, if we'll go by the chronology, then Wiggins in 1989 talks about teachers determining the students' baseline knowledge and skills. Okay, and establishes something called the learning agenda. Okay, learning agenda needs to be established. This is only about the academia, or this is an interaction between a teacher and a student. But in other policy frameworks, the policy amalgamation or the policy interaction can occur. Okay, not with the same model or the same baseline approach, but with some modifications or remodifications. Okay, so in that aspect, continuous feedback or the continuity of feedback matters much for the students' growth and improvement, which is advocated by Gen 6 in 2006. Okay, so the authentic assessment, which deals with the real world tasks and promotes cognitive transfer of learning. So while studying in my high school, I first heard about the term cognitive approach or cognitive understanding. Then I was a kid enough to understand what cognitive approach. But now being a part of the university, now also I have quite so many doubts regarding what that cognitive approach is all about. Or when I'm talking about pedagogy, I'm really confused. Whether I should go through the whole syllabus and cover it and write that in the examination, or I have to go through my creative essence of brain and then write it in the examination. In what, by doing what, I'll fetch more marks. So that cognitive transfer of learning starts from the beginning, from the LKG, UKG level of a student, when both progressive hierarchy of skills and students' knowledge progress assessment is done. Okay, so practice and repetitive practice, skills enhancement, and the authentic context supported by a feedback mechanism needs to be advocated for any public policy approach. Here, the education approach. Okay, so in 1993, Newman and Weigel, they talk about authentic learning occurs when the student constructs the meaning of events leading to knowledge gain. Okay, so they have to capture what is happening in our surroundings, or we have to capture what is happening amidst us very normally, which we neglect. When we neglect things, they actually account for our discipline or for our knowledge. So that authentic learning occurs when we capture everything around. That is called as a creative learning or creative acumen of learning, which is something out of box or out of the textbook model. Okay, so these models, how move, how they move forward. Okay, so problem identifying and demanding for a government action again moves towards. These are very normal things actually when a lot of people talk about the same thing. Okay, and this is a circular process because evaluation of policy again comes back to the identification of a problem again. So two aspects of policy legitimization through selection and enactment of a policy, and the implementation of the chosen policy always moves for an evaluation. Okay, evaluation by whom? Evaluation by the dispensation and evaluation by the people at large, because people always go for the feedback mechanism or when asked for. Okay, so that feedback matters for identifying new problems, and demands for the government action again goes through another cycle of policy movement. Okay. So this is what the policy cycle or the public policy model moves forward. So what are the approaches actually? So looking at any policy problem, mostly for a researcher or while researching on public policy, looking at a problem is always necessary, but it needs to bear some multiple perspective. Okay, so a unified perspective involves every kind of perspective, which must not be singular in nature. Okay, when we talk about the global order with respect to the higher theory, we have always talked about unipolarity, bipolarity, multipolarity. Then but in research, multiple perspective always matters. It is not in resonance with the time motion. Okay, multiple perspectives needs to be capitalized while assessing a problem or looking at a problem, and multiple solution nodes. Here, I have tried to capture the federal mechanism, which is invested in the Indian democracy in between this relationship being established between the center and the state. Okay, so when any change of government occurs, okay, the federal coziness or the federal cohesion, uh, is it really gets impacted? Or when COVID-19 struck all of us on a unprecedented scale, we were quite not prepared at all for that with respect to the health sector or the health infrastructure we had, or the planning we had, or any kind of maneuvers that happened, which mostly involved reverse migration all across the state of India. The center versus the state debate in terms of federalism always moves or sways when a government changes at the central level. So then we have to again move ahead with the best possible one or the new one when talking about public policy. So then for that, to solve that, we need to go for a multi-agency mode where every kind of policy approach or a planning involves multi-agency, so that the stakeholding would be so diverse that it couldn't be terminated easily and modifications will become swift. Okay, so some stages of functioning when compared, two institutions came to my sphere of learning. One is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and another one is the International Solar Alliance (ISA). So what they actually do is to make something more effective, or make to convert any policy goal more result bearing in nature, is they actually assess the functioning at every stage. Okay, so the functioning assessment by every stage can only happen when we have specialized multi agencies involved, having a very skilled human resource capital with us. So this is a kind of challenge for India, because to find a skill set for all the human resource capital we have, this is quite a problem. Some days before, some faculty colleagues were discussing about the Odisha state being declared, or uh, giving a quite cozy picture on the national platform that our unemployment rate is the lowest one, or the total count of unemployed heads is the lowest one in India. But how did you do that? Did we actually calculate that? What are the indicators for that? I didn't know actually. Some of my fellow colleagues working um, uh, in the discipline of economics or being a part of the state planning board, they also actually don't know that from where these figures came. So, measuring stages of functioning by any government, whether the central government or the state government, becomes necessary to assess and to actualize or to actually measure the tendencies of public policy. So, public policy mostly involves three approaches. The approaches should be empirical, evaluative, and normative, which is value critical in nature. So, the primary question, this is mostly this table is mostly for the people who want to research more on public policy. So the primary question should be: does it and will it exist based on the facts? So the facts, values, and actions define the primary questions, and then what are the type of informations we are trying to get? Whether it is descriptive and predictive in nature with respect to the approach that we have adopted, empirical in nature, and then whether the valuative approach again comes through information which is again valuative, okay, and whether the action orientation in between the normative or the value critical approach moves forward towards the prescriptive one. So on the extreme right, we have A, B, C, D, and lot others. So two characters is missing. So we need to focus on that, right? So while going through infusing some infusions of it, uh, two characters is missing, I and R. Okay. So the policy analysis or the approach of policy analysis needs to always apprehend for a focus. Focus on the part of whom? Focus on the part of the government or the people or the specific people or the administrators who are making policies, who are implementing policies, or the legislature who is actually making policies within the walls of the parliament or the state legislative assemblies. So focus on the part of what, or what should be their focus area. There's a large question mark actually when we are moving for the approaches, or while we're trying to assimilate the empirical, evaluative, and normative approaches in the same policy discourse, in the same public policy discourse. Okay, so the missing characters of an alphabet or a policy centric approach needs to be identified on time, on a real time basis. That is what is necessary. So, a policy problem could not always be completely scientific or systematic. It needs some aspects which needs to be valued or evaluated. Creativity, sagacity, longevity, adversity, and tenacity. These are very what? These are very. Some people say, or some people opine that these are so-called very comfortable things to say, but not actually possible to work on. Creativity, sagacity, and longevity are somewhat contested. Adversity is a part and parcel of any policy making, and the policy needs to be strong enough so that it can bear the tenacity of the society or the expectation of the people. So, infusing these attributes in a policy framework and then observing on the part of the functionaries becomes something apparent while talking about public policy. So this is all about policy systems. Okay. So this is again adapted from Thomas R. Dye's Understanding of Public Policy in a volume, which talks about three aspects: how public policy and policy environment and policy stakeholders interact with each other. There are some examples actually. So this is the chart specifically made with an intention to evaluate what percentage attribute to what. Okay, so policy environment should have more stakes, or the policy stakeholders should have more stakes. Okay, this is roughly I have made it 40-60 ratio intentionally, but it changes. It changes on a country to country, on a policy to policy basis. Okay, so in terms of some uh, aspects which we try to assess: crime, inflation, unemployment, discrimination, and urban squalor. Okay, squalor is something very nasty. No? The urban problems, errors, urban kachraj, right? So these are urban squalors. So how to resolve them? We're talking about the smart city project, no? And then the smart city project involves the ranking framework as well, so that the cities would be inspired enough to perform better. So then the policy environment in terms of all these, okay, crime, inflation, unemployment, discrimination, and urban squalor, the public policy at the end moves forward towards enforcement of law, economic prosperity, welfare-centric policies, personnel management, urban maneuvering, and urban-rural reduction of gap and all, urban amenities available to the people in a qualitative way. So, what are the policy stakeholders then? They are the policy analysts first, then the citizens groups, which nowadays have become a primary part of any policy discourse. Labor unions, since time immemorial from human growth, labor unions have always raised their voice for a effective policy regime anywhere across the globe. Parties and agencies, parties in form of political parties, people's parties, group of people, or agencies in terms of private agencies, stakeholders, or the parties who are involved in the PPP mode towards functioning or towards fructifying any public policy framework, they all constitute the policy stakeholders group. Okay, so their interaction and their exhibition of uh, cordiality between each other defines the whole system's approach. Okay, so what are the challenges actually? So some situations, it comes or the public policy comes in form of a disguise. We cannot actually see it. Okay, or what we see, that's not real. And sometimes we say that what we see is not real. Okay, so in that front, uh, difficulty is to address it in a proper way. Okay, for example, a government rarely will have a fixed supervisory values for all its actions, and then in that respect, the significant public policies are not frequently clear to everyone involved. Okay, maybe um, in a supra structure, or in a supra state structure, or in the superior subordinate hierarchy, uh, uh, the specificity becomes hazy. Okay, so then comes the multidimensionality, okay, which is inherent in nature. So it sometimes overlaps and contradicts also. Overlapping is different and contradicting is different. Some are ill-defined ones, some very rare ones, or they are normally called, some policy analysts call it wicked problems. Okay, and for a practitioner or for an individual or for a capacity-bearing man who is a functionary of public policy, the consensus over social goals are always illusory. Okay, so this is really good. Society would be beneficial by this, or more number of people would be happy on one front, and on the other front, building up a consensus, every kind of consensus I'm talking about, consensus on the political framework, consensus on the functionaries who are working on the ground, or consensus on the part of the policy framers from the root. Okay, this becomes illusory for the man who is at the grassroots level while making it functional. So the preferences and values of decision makers becomes paramount in that respect. Okay, so another important aspect which I kind of neglected till now, or which I was initially talking about, which is quite brightly functioning in recent time, is all about policy sciences. Okay, so this is about a thought of someone who has talked about all these things actually almost 7 decades before. Okay, I'm talking about Harold Laswell. Okay, in 1951, he has written an essay. Okay, the policy orientation. It was discussed then. It was discussed again at the advent of 21st century by our former People's President, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. The essay called Policy Orientation. He has actually quoted it in a speech. Okay, so I got a grasp over the essay, and the essay co-edited or co-authored by Daniel Lerner, he labeled policy sciences very uniquely. he tried to define the result of a policy or a discipline while making and relating it to something called a society relevant knowledge. Okay? Or the society relevant knowledge system becomes apparent when we are trying to win over the disguise norms, or to win over the disguise to make something very real, actually real, not seemingly real. Okay? So, multidisciplinarity, contextual and problem orientation solving, and then the explicitly normative character of a policy needs to be identified always on the part of the policy framer. He stresses on that. Okay, so the multidisciplinarity perspective, or while finding alternatives also for any kind of policy identification, the evaluation needs to be specific at any point of time. So that explicitly normative perception, uh, this is a kind of bright outlook on the part of Mr. Laswell, that policy sciences are characterized by normative components always, and they are normative in their concern with the human value system. So while trying to chat out the challenges, are they really challenges? So the inherently multidimensional disguise come to the fore, and then the overlap and contradict, and then repeat. Overlap, contradict, repeat. Overlap, contradict, repeat. This happens. This happens in a democracy more by the government. So this vicious cycle never ends. So the ill-defined and wicked problems, are they really wicked or ill-defined? So the illusory factor and preferences and values of decision makers needs to be addressed properly, regardless of their explanations or expectations. Okay, I would like to try to make it a little clear in a way. The programs of any government are having some checks and bounds, right? And the opposition is always there, or any system, the system has some limitations. So some theorists argue that while dealing with the qualitative techniques like operations research, or basically value free and apprehensions of moral and values while dealing with any social plan, uh, some dogmas needs to be broken. Okay, or some policy analysts also claim that uh, the principles were the select areas of the makers of the policy, or their specialization overlaps with the actual need of the people. For example, when we're choosing someone for the Indian administrative services, and their background specialization actually hovers on their head, mostly hovers on their head in form of specialization. So that reduces the value neutrality of a policy. So while researching on public policy, for any researcher, value neutrality is essential, but while looking at public policy, value neutrality becomes much more essential, or it becomes the paramount basis of understanding. Okay. So while dealing the goals, the methods of policy sciences, it is always the policy science orientation is always probabilistic in nature. So we cannot always be concrete while going for a policy to move forward and give us effective or expected results. It is always probabilistic. So that probabilistic aspect should be reduced or minimalized for any government. That should be the goal. Or maybe when talking about the Constitution of India, and in all my classes, when I'm talking about a contrast between the preamble and the DPSP, the Directive Principles of State Policies, something is the core based on which we have framed this constitution, and something is the ideal point where we have to reach. Okay, so having the roots and reaching for the dreams, we need to move through a viable mechanism. That viable mechanism should be understandable, acceptable, and accessible for everyone. That is also the same framework from MDGs to SDGs to for any development indicator or parameter of the world. It needs to be accessible for everyone. So then only we can make something equitable, moving it up from equality norms. Okay, and I think I have to conclude, right? How much time I have more, Dr. Mishra?
No, there is no time limit. I think if you want to conclude, you can conclude. No problem.
Okay, so I'll be concluding in another 5 minutes. Okay? Okay. Thank you so much. So, something to conclude on the character or the nature of a public policy needs to be always challenged by challenged in terms of its empirical features or while relating it with other sciences that needs to be captured. Some say, for example, while talking about any social activity or intention of an individual, we go for something called an ideology. Okay, ideology of an individual or thought process of an individual. So, some people opine that does ideology also belongs to public policy? Sometimes yes. The policy sciences are always loaded with useful expectations. Always. So, for example, the policy sciences targets as some individualism, some systemic, some efficacy, and always going for maximum resource distribution or maximum or maximization of production. Okay, so the description of the notions or the containing aspects of the growth of analysis for any country, whether it is in favor of our national interest or whether it is any compelling international order situational order, the policy scientists or the policy analyst always struggles to expand the scope of the policy. Okay, mostly because of social and political events. Okay, then according to or due to that, the community or people suffers. Okay, so the discipline has to make some intelligent moves with respect to the change of time. Okay, so learning from previous policy programs or during my research on renewable energy policy, we need to go for something called the policy integration process, where some policies used to integrate with or some best performing policies used to integrate with some lesser performing policies. Okay, this is called as policy coupling. Okay, so this policy coupling is a sector or a specific growth trajectory is creating marks. So it needs to be embedded with something not so better performing, so that uh, being driven by that only, the whole process would get some more motion. Okay, so this policy coupling approach is mostly ideal or suitable for developing countries. And for a very much diversified state like India, policy coupling actually bears fruit. Okay, while going for the Ganga rejuvenation mission of the government, although we have achieved a little. Okay, but some aspects of policy making of it in those states where river Ganga flows, uh, they have achieved some results. While managing the industrial outputs and then directly diverting them to the rivers, they have actually contained something. So there is a kind of satisfaction report on the part of the National Green Tribunal, although very little we have achieved in those last 10 years when we have initially planned for it, but somewhat we have achieved. Okay. And then finally, concluding on my observations of policy approaches or policy sciences or the policy methods or the policy attributes we talked about, the analytical methods, we cannot deny any policy because it is different or unique or immediately it seems not productive or not to be fruitful or not attractive for the people or sometimes during the poll process for the voters. Okay, we have to actually go through the intent of it and long term measure. For example, the information created by the policy, whether it is relevant or the policy dialogues or the discussions are bearing something mm, called value system for the society at large, and then people how it is or whether it is going to include everyone or not, or people are going to benefit at a delayed point maybe, but whether it bears some value or not. So for example, if I'll be talking about some aspects of it, continuity of relevance or policy inquiry as a challenge for researchers, especially research scholars, when they are dealing with some policy certainties and uncertainties involved. The policy sciences, according to as a disciplinarian of political science or public administration, democratization. Democratization of public policy or democratization of policy sciences needs to be advocated not only by individuals or the states, but by everyone, but by the agencies, the think tanks, by the civil society, everyone, all the stakeholders should think about the rationality and democratization of public policy so that we can achieve maximum. So thank you for the patience, and in between, as we are silent, we also saved some resources. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Dr. Das. I think the title would have been like this: researching public policy. You know, whether it is, doing research on public policy or in public policy, there is always a, contestation. I,
Okay.
I understood,
Mhm.
after you just said it.
Mhm.
uh, so the appropriate title would have been like this: researching public policy. And when we are saying researching public policy, we means researching the concept of public policy,
Okay.
like
Okay.
the development of that concept of public policy,
Mhm.
and researching the components of public policy,
Okay.
and then researching the significance of public policies. So
Mhm.
in your talk, I think you have touched on these points, right? So those who are doing research on public policy, like Om Prakash, he is doing research on public policy. He can understand what is the, methodology, or what approach a researcher must adopt when he or she is doing research on public policy. So thank you, Dr. Das, for this academic engagement on this concept of public policy. Now, we have among us Dr. Samanta Sahu from Rajiv Gandhi University, Arunachal Pradesh. He is my senior in Hyderabad University. Uh, he is the discutant of today's, web talk. Now, Samanta Bhaya, you may continue.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Uh, I hope
Good
I have
afternoon.
received of you. I hope you.
There is some problem. You know, you can unmute your video. You
Okay.
can continue your audio.
What I can that my video only I will talk on. Okay. That would the voice would be more clear to you. It's audible now properly. Am I?
Okay, you continue. I will let you know.
Yes. In between, if suppose I am not properly audible, you can talk. Thank you so much
Yes.
to Dr. Himanshu, who happens to my also, and to Dr. Das, who has delivered a wonderful lecture just before. And the difficult part actually is on me now, especially talking about a colleague and his talk. You know. Anyway, the title of the talk that we spoke about some 2 days back also, Himanshu talked to me about this, doing research and public policy and all that. It appealed to me a lot, great deal. It has been my area of research, public policy and governance for more than a decade by now. And therefore, instantly I got interested in this topic, and that I thought I somehow would like to get associated with it. Thanks to Himanshu that I'm here. Now, when we talk about public policy research and the topic of today's discussion, Dr. Das very aptly tries to capture the nitty-gritties of doing research, and also tries to bring in discussions relating to different public policy discourses from global level to the national level to the local state level, also bringing about different kinds of examples from Odisha and all that. And therefore, it became very interesting. But somewhere there are also some contradiction that I saw in between. I'll be talking about that in the discussion that I am going on now. So when we talk about public policy research, especially looking at the entire, the contour of the trajectory of public policy research uh, at a global level and at the regional, at the local, national level also. It has been for a long time sidelined, neglected, or it's in a constant state of flux actually. And the leaders again are like the West, led by the United States, the UK, which started thinking about public policy separate. And they started researching on this, like the Maxwell rule and other, between. They started, specialized courses on public policy, especially in the West. And when we look at India's case, we were somewhere, we were left behind. Very aptly captured in one article which was way back in 79, Mirror in Political Weekly. And the title of the article is today's discussion actually: Social Science Research and Public Policy in India. This was the title of the article that was published in the Economic and Political Weekly in 79. And this aptly captures the state of public policy research when we talk about, especially in India in general actually. Now I'll just read one sentence of that. Research in this field is in a preliminary phase. Studies remain scattered and generally unrelated to one another, lack a theoretical focus, and are not as yet cumulative, something like this. So this actually summarizes the entire thing concerning public policy research, public policy discourse in India today. Uh, some institutes like Ahmedabad or Bangalore, some of now by now, and others, and also some Indian Institute of Technologies and some universities, barring that we do not have any specialized kind of institutes which start talking, but then they all have actually in the later phase, 70s, 80s, like that actually. And when we talk about public policy research, public policy approaches, this has been primarily rational bureaucratic or rational technocratic approach all throughout, which Dr. Das also tried to address during his lecture. Now, when we talk about public policy research, who have dominated the entire domain, it has been for a long time, even now also, if we look at in India and globally also, dominated by primarily the economists. The economists, from people from the economic discipline. No issue with that. But then it has been dominated by them, and the primary objective behind that is to study the policy effect and the designing of choices. So if we look at that rational model, the rational model talks about identify the problem, identify the goal, identify the alternatives, do a cost benefit analysis, and then choose the best alternative out of the entire that you have identified. So in this, when we are talking about only the last segment, the policy effect, that has been the primary area of the domain of discussion and research and of designing choices by them. And this is where some of the recent writings like Kuldeep Mathur and others, in our case Vishal Narayan and many others are there actually. They have talked about how the people from political science, public administration, sociology, and others must pitch in terms of trying to understand processes of public policy making, not only in India, but globally. Because when we talk about public policy, that rational model that I'm referring to, or Dr. Das referred to earlier, this rational model reduces everything to a ethnocentric approach, and everything is reduced to some numbers. That is that positivist tradition that we talk about actually. But then public policy, when we're talking about, it relates to vital socio-political questions in the society. Vital socio-political question. And therefore, in order to understand social things in totality, there is a need for a holistic to look at public policy research of doing public policy and the entire process of public policy rather than just reducing everything into numbers. And this is where when we talk about some sort of changes that started taking place, especially since the 1980s, the notable changes that we can see in public policy discourse globally and in India, since the 1980s, with the World Bank's implementation of economic reforms programs in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, and a slow process of liberalization that began. And especially in our case, in India's case, it is in 1991 after the implementation of economic reforms programs. And what subsided, added to that was the 73rd and 74th Constitution Amendment Act that we passed in India, which made the third tier of government constitutional. And in addition to this, something else also happened in the recent time when we look at, some ethnocentric induced changes that started happening, like environment, urbanization, climate change, governance reforms, or you can talk about new public management. All this coincided in the late 80s and the 90s. And this is where, when we talk about governance reforms, when we talk about new public management, they all also brought in to focus actors other than the state, or state actors like the civil society, like the market, and similar kind of voluntary organizations and all that. And they started playing a role in terms of public policy making, which never had been seen earlier, which were public policy primarily a realm of the state and the government. So when we talk about public policy research in the present time, what we have seen in the literature that comes up, the top-down approach, which has been the public policy making apparatus, has been challenged. There is a challenge to that top-down approach, with especially the 73rd and 74th Constitution Amendment Act being passed. The techno-rational, techno-bureaucratic model have come under pressure. And this is where, as Dr. Das talks about, the three approaches of understanding public policy and doing research: the empirical approach, the evaluative approach, the normative approach. Because all of them cumulatively can make the success or failure of public policy. But that is not so in the present context when we look at. And a third kind of thing is the authoritative allocation of values. David Easton talks about. When we talk about this authoritative allocation of values, which is that authoritative instrument of allocating values for a longer period of time, for very long time, the understanding was the state being the authoritative agency or the instrument of allocating values in the society, because that is the supreme supreme organization within our human society. It wields the authority to do that, and that has come under pressure. And from where it has come from under pressure? It has come under pressure primarily from the market, the civil society, and the citizens group, which we have seen all around. For example, we may take the example of the farmers' protest and the government of India taking back the free farm bills and all that. The very recent kind of thing. Then talk about how the other actors are also playing a part in public policy making in recent times. In this context, the new social and political forces, they have limited the positivist approach or methods to policy studies. The positivist approach talks about, something scientific, value-free, value-neutral approach and all that. So in such a situation, what happens? When we are talking about a failure of public policy, the failure is attributed to politics. But when it comes to implementation and making of public policy, primarily it is a techno-bureaucratic approach which is taken. But the failure is attributed to the political part. So this is where the positivist methods has come under pressure from the new social and political forces in the society. And there is an increasing level of understanding when we talk about public policy, that public policy making is a realm of contradiction and negotiations. This is what we must understand, and especially those people who are part of this lecture and all that. Which Sen also talks about in Development as Freedom. There are many on freedoms that Sen talks about. So when we talk about the today's talk, entire talk, it has been very informative, I must say. And the speaker, Dr. Das, has tried to bring out very little points within the public policy discourse, citing from some of the masters of public policy, Laswell, David Easton, Yunus, and many others. And but then somewhere, I found the talk little skewed in terms of research. It could have been little more focused towards India, since the people who are attending, they would be primarily focusing on the cases of either Odisha or in general India and all that. And somewhere I agree with Dr. Das that there are many challenges of doing research, and we must not only look towards a scientific or systematic kind of approach, but there must also be ethnocentric approach, because there are vital questions which are related to public policy making, not just like why policies are formulated and why a particular policy is adopted. These kind of questions must be researched rather than just the impact or the outcome of policies that we talk about. And on the whole, I found, or I hope all of them, they must have found this very useful talk. And I stop with this. Thank you so much, Himanshu.
So thank you, Dr. Shahu. I think academics is all about this. I mean, we are here to say what is good and what is bad. I think the similar question Rajat Kumar is also asking. Rajat Kumar is also asking the similar question. If public policies are what the government chooses to do or not to do, is it not the despotic nature of the government? Again, if public policy promotes socio-economic welfare of the people and environmental welfare, then why are people demanding good governance? So I think since we are belonging to the political science, when this public policy comes, always there is a state and there is a public demand, and in between it there are also many other stakeholders or actors. So Dr. Das, you respond to this question along with the response given by Dr. Sahu. You have to unmute.
Thank you, Dr. Hemanta, sir. I really am glad that you try to appreciate some things and you try to bring out some conjectures which are actually I failed to focus on. And in a span of almost 70-80 minutes, I think the large gamut of things which constitute public policy is not actually tough for anyone to completely focus on. So maybe we can bring out some papers or bring out some writings on specific aspects of public policy, on which maybe we can micro attribute things to definitively get some answers. So while talking about global or national, and then some things of the regional level being neglected, coming all them to the fore and compiling up, it's actually a tough task for anyone. So thank you, sir, for so many wonderful new thoughts which are striking my mind, and I'll try to remember all those. So regarding the question of, I can see the in-call messages, so I'll try to respond that. So if public policy is what the government chooses to do or not to do, is it not despotic nature of the government? Despotic nature of the government, okay. What I have understood social sciences or individual attributes is individuals become despots, but when the government becomes despot, then it's actually a fall point for the democracy at large. So despotic nature of the government happens. It happens during the notes of the poll process, or during the notes of some charges of corruption, mismanagement, or maybe while I remember a author, Mr. Gyan Prakash, who tries to chronicle the emergency period of the government of India. At that point of time, the government was despotic actually in nature, and the balance between the three organs, legislature, executive, and judiciary, was actually going through several fault lines. The government was mostly trying to malign with the open and neutrality of the judiciary. Yes, so at some points the government becomes despot due to compelling situations. And once again, I'm saying it repetitively that in a pluralistic and critically diversified state like India, some issues out of proportion also uh, become a part of the public discussion uh, to to safeguard its priorities, or to safeguard its personal interests on the part of the party agenda or the government. Also, the government becomes despot. This is also a part of the public policy deliberation process, or they do it deliberately. Okay, to settle some points of time which not behaves in favor of them. But again, as you have pointed out, that public policy promotes socio-economic welfare of the people. Yes, always. Public policy always promotes socio-economic welfare of the people. There is no question mark on this. And environmental welfare now it is more, because after some of the intervention of judiciary, some of the courts, including the Allahabad High Court and Mumbai High Court, have declared trees equal to human beings, rivers equal to human beings. And then, when we're talking about the relationship between actors and non-actors, actors being live in nature and non-actors being not live in nature, they consider trees and plants and rivers actually live in nature. So, the environmental goals with respect to the global commitments we have on a short-term and long-term uh, tracks of global dialogue process, or the environmental stakes involved. Environmental welfare or socio-economic welfare are always a part of the central dispensation or the state dispensation, beginning from the planning commission days, or the 5-year plan days, and the transformed 2014 Niti Aayog period. So at every point of time, socio-economic welfare and environmental welfare is always at the center point or the focal point of moving ahead. But then, why people are demanding good governance? Because I think there is no actual end, although means are available, but there is no end of governance, right? Governance has to improve and re-improve, and governance has to improvise itself to provide greater goods for the people at every point of time. Do you think e-governance in its best form, or something like all the developed states becoming a benchmark, and then all the developing countries reaching them, is there an end of it? End of something called the highest level of satisfaction on the part of the governance for everyone? No, there's no end. You can achieve several means of it, but there is no end. So people will always demand for good governance. May it be 2022 now, or may it be after 1,000 or 2,000 years. Good governance would always remain a requirement on the part of the people, because egalitarianism is not actually possible on a real time basis, right? Or the concept of Ram Rajya, or the social aspects of egalitarianism. These concepts are actually a kind of markers, or these are some kind of value laden uh, principles for us, for the government, or the markers of inspiration on the path of which we should move, so that we can expand the fold of evaluation and fold of welfare up to some better extent, but it has no ends. So the demand for good governance would remain for time immemorial, according to my understanding of social sciences, which is always contested in nature. We have no concrete answers like mathematics or statistics. But going for an answer, yes, this is the concrete answer, full marks. You cannot go for that in social sciences. So good governance is both qualitative and quantitative in nature, and it is a act in progression. Okay? It has no ends actually. So the people will always demand for good governance. at any point of time, whether it was in history or the future, the present we all live in. Okay.
No, I think Rajat's question is having a relevance, and this
Mhm.
top-down approach is also deeply problematic.
Okay.
And there is also, problem from the, government side also. There are
Mhm.
politics, politics and government governance. You
Okay.
cannot separate,
Right.
them. There are different stakeholders.
Mhm.
But at the same time, there is a concept like a dil mange more and more. That is also, the demand for good governance. We need more and more,
Right.
right? So both are actually, right. But, the intelligent way of reading Rajat's question is that, uh, is it possible to adopt a bottom top approach, not top to bottom, bottom to top approach, so far as the public, policy is concerned, making a public policy is concerned, or what are the obstacles if you adopt such a, approach?
Okay. So we need to have a new prescriptive way of uh, okay, bottom up approach. I'll think over it maybe.
Okay. Okay, the last question, Dr. Das, you can take, you can also read, since you are
Yeah, right.
reading,
This is
that
about
Niyati Abhipsa is asking the last question. You can take this last question.
okay. Is social equity practicable in highly populated country like India? Apparently, immediately no. Okay, because again, continuing with the same flow of uh, equalizing between quantitative and qualitative aspects, social equity is something diverse in nature, maybe somewhat contested. Some people accept it as equity, and some people do not. According to economics, satisfaction is something very different, and satisficing is something very, very different, which is pointed out by Thomas Piketty, the famous economist. Satisfaction you can bring in up to some extent, but satisfaction with sufficiency for everyone, as you have brightly pointed out, highly populated country, right? So having a 1.3 billion plus population, bringing in social equity is almost impossible now. But yeah, we can move ahead, or we're actually moving ahead in that direction. I'll be optimistic always. As far as democracy is concerned, some people criticize it as an average form of functioning, but I'm always optimistic about democracy. So to bring social equity, government needs resources. But can you? We can mobilize resources, but some primary resources cannot be created, right? They exist. Okay, we have sufficient for the needs, not for the creeds, right? So the the resources which exist with us, we can mobilize them, we can better utilize them, or we can better manifest them in terms of their enhancing their production capacity, or for example, India is the brightest node in the service sector. Okay, but how to create resources? Some resources could not be created, right? Just like the energy potential we have. So yes, this one is something very interesting. Can disinvestment of government stakes or privatization can help government to bring social equity? A little, but I was actually teaching a paper on paper part, a unit on disinvestment and privatization. So what I try to find out through the unit of the paper in my master's classes is this is actually some ideas of the students actually, that investment concerns some public entities, or the entities bearing some legacy, which are value laden apart from being resource laden. They are a constant act of growth. After independence, we have built up some institutions which are actually resulting, and they're actually performing well for the people. So they are the public sector companies or the public sector units, and then some of the units which are, although primarily scarcely managed by the private, but still they are public entities. Okay, so this investment in a way to generate funds or revenues at a time of tragedy, just like COVID-19, is somewhat justified, and government justified in that way because the RBI also declared something called we are scarce with resources, so we need some resources, or we need to regenerate some resources so that the budgeting mechanism could move ahead, and then some greatly allocated funds would not stall, just like Mahatma Gandhi Narega and other schemes. The fund delimiting cannot happen in that respect. So, in some respect, they justified in consonance with the RBI, the government, the finance ministry also came out with the same opinion that this investment is actually necessary. But privatization in some way to enhance efficiency, to say somewhat the redressal mechanism would be strengthened, the tech manifestation would be more brighter, or in that sense, some lethargic or some slow moving, tortoise moving public agencies would be faster, or the public satisfaction indexes would be higher. So in that respect, some privatization aspects are actually, they have actually bore fruits, or the more inculcation of privatization within the limits of Indian Railway has actually transformed things. Okay, so the idea is not bad, but how it is actually implemented, that matters a lot. And what is the real intent of the government, apart from the political agendas they have, or the populist measures they have? Okay, to bring in social equity, we always need not focus on welfare. Actually, we have to also capitalize on how much resources we have for what period of time. Okay, being a research scholar from the domain of energy, okay, I would say that these things are not uh, uh, these things are not going to exist for time immemorial, right? They'll finish up. Okay? So for that, we need some global reincarnation of our negotiations. We need to make some more strategic moves. Or, for example, in recent times, since last week, at every platform, we're talking about the rupee ruble arrangement with Russia, right? So that both the currencies will be strengthened in a symbiotic way. And most of the countries have putting pressure on the Russian government, and trying to make some maneuvers in the financial front um, by sanctioning or cutting off trade ties. So at that point, because for India on a long-term basis, or as Samantha sir said, we need to focus more on the national interests and the regional interests as well. So the domestic policies and the national policies are not always parallel. Their trajectories also intersect with each other. So the national interest will have fruits, bright fruits for the states also, in terms of resources mobilization and resource allocation when we are going through the scarcity of hydrocarbons. Okay, so we are importing 70-80% of our resources from outside. So that to balance that import mechanism, or to go for a trusted partner, because at every point of time when India was imposed with sanction, Russia was the only one who has stood with us. Okay, so in that respect, going ahead for a rupee ruble arrangement is again in favor of our national interest and their national interest as well. We're not so much concerned about their national interest, but our national interest matters to us more. So to bring in social equity, I don't know. Actually, I have never seen any socially equitable state in the world. Some are almost perfect, from Nordic countries, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, which are performing based on the HTI framework, human satisfaction indexes, happiness indexes on every front. But they are not perfect. They have not actually achieved the real social equity parameters. They are moving towards a social equity norm, which are kind of ideal for everyone. They are inching closer to the near perfect figures. But achieving social equity in real terms for India will take a long time. This is my understanding.
So thank you, Hemanta, for this wonderful you know experience with you in this evening.
Thank you.
Right. So we are at the last part of this event. Now we want Om Prakash to provide vote of thanks to our speaker.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Hemanta Mishra, sir, for giving me chance to vote of thanks these two eminent great person in this today's webinar, Dr. Hemanta Kumar Das, sir, and Dr. Samantha, sir, brilliantly discuss about this public policy whatever sir said about the authority allocation of value for the society, whatever the David Easton mentioned in his policy, that when policy is made for the benefits of the society, and when come to the society, but in present context also, whatever I have observed in my research, that there is a gap between the government and for the local people. I am doing the research in the Niti Aayog that one policy is made for government is making a huge number of policy, but still coming to the local level, they are unknown about that policy. So there is a very give, very lack among us. And sir also explained about this nature scope book, which is very useful for the present generation, those who are doing the research on the public policy. And public policy, particularly public policy, very useful when you will work on the primary data, because I have looked that some students are doing the taking one policy for the secondary data. But if you don't know when come to the field how happening taking the policy, it will be very useful taking the primary data. And we also mentioned that public policy is particularly for the political system. Whatever the debations say that when we are making government is making policy, and but there is a lack of also feedback process. In Odisha, or we can take the example of Odisha, a huge number of policies made by the government of Odisha, but still they are not working. But there are some policies, we can take the Monrega. When the Corona came, Monrega policies is very effectively working nowadays. And whatever sir also explained is very useful for us, those who are doing the research in the public policy. And thanks to Dr. Samantha sir also brilliantly explained about the public policy for those who are doing the research on particularly public policy, not particular public policy, on the public administration also, it will be very useful for us. And in this webinar, thanks to all the participants for your patience and hearing about this brilliant webinar. And thanks to Dr. Himanshu sir for organizing such type of brilliant webinar, and as a consultant of this webinar, as a technical expert of this webinar. Thank you, sir.
So thank you, Om. I mean, always the strength of a teacher is his students only. So your interest is my strength. So without students, the teacher cannot do anything. So it's all about student, and that's why in JNU great teachers call themselves, they are also student. A student of political science, a student of public policies. You take any international figure on public policy, they will say that I'm the student of public policy. That means there are many things to
Sir,
learn.
I happily enjoy this webinar because I am doing the research on the particular policy, taking in the international solar alliance, whatever the India has signed 121 countries, how the solar energy particularly working in Odisha, all India level. I happily enjoy this webinar, sir. Thank you, sir.
And today's expert has also done research on that energy, right, Hemanta?
Yes.
And that's why I didn't say actually. I mean, you are the student of SIS, right? School
Yes.
of International Studies.
Right.
So, okay, since recording is going on, we should not talk informally. So, thank you, Dr. Das, for accepting our informal invitation. And this is a wonderful experience with you. And we are there for the longer period in the academics, so we'll meet. So thank you one and all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.